Morning. Oh, ah, oh. So, on the topic of Finnish national defense, I came up with the thought when I was reading the Defense Forces response to the Minister of, I think it was Health. It wasn't the Prime Minister, and far as I remember, it wasn't the Defense Minister who said that they're requesting the defense forces to do 5,000 work hours, I think, over the next 2 years. So it wasn't a major request, something that could theoretically be done in helping the vaccination thing. And the way I read it was that the service staffers, personnel, what have you, who have a education in healthcare, for example, could help do the vaccinations. They could do the injections. The guys with a training in crowd control, for example, could do security for the sites because the let's say disturbance surrounding the injections is such that many of these places actually require safety workers because they are not all they're cracked up to be, and people are getting some interesting responses to it. And the ministry made a official request, and the defense forces declined and said that the defense forces aren't in place for health emergencies. And I just thought to myself, we've had 3 or 4 declinations. I think declination isn't the right word. Refusals by the defense force to assist the government in crisis over the past couple of years. There have been crises such as the forest storm damage, and they were told by the defense forces that they aren't for forest damage and such. In the past, the standard go-to used to be the military when the state needed quick response to a thing, and that is or was the military's job. They weren't in place to do just war. They were meant to do anything relating to a danger on the country. So they refused to send the soldiers to help with the vaccination things. And from what I can gather, this is a systemic problem in that they are quite often refusing to help the government. And I'm just thinking this might be the wrong kind of authoritarian mumbo jumbo, but where the fuck does the defense forces get up with the idea that they even can refuse the ministry? I mean, where do they get that idea? Are they literally saying that the minister is committing treason? Because that would be the only acceptable cause for them to decline. I mean, I may be old school here. I know I get told a lot that I'm a Russian proxy, so that old school back in the friggin' 1900s. But where does the defense forces get the gall to say to a ministry that we won't help in a time of crisis? I mean, where do they get the permission to do that? And I've kept an eye on the defense forces for a while now, and it's starting to look like they aren't in the business of defending Finland. They're in the business of reconquering Finland, in that they aren't in place to defend Finland during a crisis. They are in place to damage anybody causing Finland a crisis instead of helping during the crisis. And speaking as someone whose military mindset about Finland comes mostly from the Second World War, this army is a different army. It doesn't seem to be interested in crisis management. Now, personally, I'm not opposed to this. I mean, if we want, we can actually do what I was intending to do about the civil service, which is make the civil service the crisis management non-military unit and make the military just the military, because the more connections the military has with the civilian government, the harder it will be for them to fight, because when they fight, will have to, in essence, endanger civilians. That is the nature of war. So when their connections with the civilian government are strong, the probability of them fighting to the point where the civilian government is endangered is low, unless the military leader is also the civilian leader in a very autocratic sense, a very visceral authoritarian sense. Then they will fight to the end, but only because it's a warlord and his personal army. So I don't know the determination of Finnish soldiers to actually defend the country during a war, but I'm starting to dislike what I'm seeing. I mean, it's not encouraging. I mean, the force request is something that to me seems completely legitimate. The military has wide arrays of first aid and security in a civilian environment professional training, meaning that if the injection sites truly are troubled by civilian disturbance and the police truly are troubled in trying to keep them safe, then a request to the military truly is the right thing to do. But in this case, it feels more like a single minister commanding the military over the government's permission. And in that case, true, you should not obey. But this kind of confusion is exactly what I said is my primary concern about the Finnish army when I was 18 and signing up for the army, doing my basic training, which I did for 2 weeks before I quit, but I did my basic training. And the opinion that I had, the question that I had to the main military spokesperson in the seminars that we were forced to attend was that if the president and the commander of the military are two separate persons and one orders you to do one thing while another orders you to do another thing, which are you legally obligated to follow? And he said such a thing can't happen in the modern day. And I laughed it off. And it was, in fact, one of the main reasons why I left their complete sheepish stupidity about the dangers of things like hybrid warfares and such. They've caught up a little, but they're still decades behind what they need to be. And if I were to join them, my method would be so radically different than theirs that they would teach me their method. And when I would try to teach them my method, they would be, back and forth. But my complaints with the Finnish military are small. There are a few here and there, but they're small. In this particular case, it feels a little bit more like a single minister from a single ministry ordering a private army to help them with their task instead of the entirety of the government with minister, which are two different people, ordering the military to help. It doesn't seem to come from the entirety of the government, just a single minister. Now, the excuse the military said or gave for why they don't respond was one of it's not a military crisis, which is complete bullshit. This is the very definition of a military crisis, an infection pandemic, which is threatening the population. It is roughly the same as something like a nuclear plant exploding. That is the very definition of something that the public needs protection from. So it be the military coming up with a good excuse about not helping when the real reason they're not helping is that to help a single minister and a single ministry do this would be overstepping the boundaries. But if it comes from the government as a unified force, then it's a completely different deal. Then they can essentially order the military to do anything. But if this was a case where the government, in an official manner, orders the military in an official manner to assist with the vaccination program, and the military in an official manner refuses, then I would say we have a coup, a literal, actual coup. But if this is just one minister and one ministry asking the military and the military going, we would love to help, but you don't have the government's permission, so we can't, then it's a different matter. And I haven't studied this case in exquisite detail, in like super clear picture. I haven't researched it much, but from the little I have, it seems a little suspicious to me that the military would refuse a government request. I mean, I understand them looking at the minister and going like, this is just one guy. But even with that one, I wonder why the military didn't send a message to the government at large and asking them to confirm the order instead of flatly refusing. If they sent an order up their command chain to the military commander, who then personally contacted the government as a whole and asked to clarify the order as to what they're expected to do, then it would be okay. It would cause a larger crisis, but it would mitigate the underlying issue, which is that the military, far as I know, shouldn't have the permission to refuse a government aid request, even if they are under-equipped and under-prepared. Then the reality still is that they basically should do it because it comes from the government. The military is a separate branch of government that is only paid by the government and not strictly controlled by the government. It is like a war band, if you will. You pay them to be around as your military, and when the war comes, you hope that they help you. But these crises go to show exactly what I was kind of afraid of, that the military won't help the government in a time of crisis, and that's at the current moment a very bad signal to send. On the other hand, mobilizing, let's say, 5,000 reservists to help with this thing is an even bigger no no. So it's a hard question. But uh, so so long story short, this to me is a very troubling signal. To allow the defense forces to ignore a government order is a very dangerous signal, because nothing tells us that they won't help us in a worse crisis than refusing to help us in a minor crisis. I mean, nothing is more indicative of a bad outcome than that. I would be very hesitant to trust a group that is supposed to help us by dying if necessary, if they won't help us to vaccinate part of our population that is still, as far as I know of, only voluntary vaccinations. I mean, are they saying they don't trust the vaccinations? Are they saying they don't trust the minister? Are they saying what exactly? Because I know for a fact that they have the ability to build military hospitals and put vaccination trucks into the field, and they have the ability to do this stuff. The fact that they're refusing is, to me, a very bad sign. It is a very, very bad sign. It is by far one of the worst signals I have ever seen from Finnish military. Yeah, nothing new on Scope News. Okay, so according to this article, the defense forces have in the past actually helped during some of these corona things, but only in as far as the requests came from the hospital precinct or the municipal county or like precinct or whatever. And they are actually mostly the defense minister and services minister arguing. And the number that the services minister said of asking for people from the defense forces is insanely high. It is something that no military person in their right fucking mind would agree to. This is what happens when you are working with limited information. And there are things like the law says that the vaccinations and other healthcare actions of this nature have to be administered by medical personnel and not anybody else. So it would require a change of law if they were put in like vaccine administration duties. And the jobs that they've mostly had are in finding people who have been exposed to the disease in the past and stuff like that. And seems like the initial reporting was a little off based on what I'm seeing here. And the military has, in fact, helped the corona actions in the past. So, yeah. But this one caught my eye. Well, this one can't be me. They're protesting the rise of the cost of energy and electricity. And if this were me, as in the actions I did in Kazakhstan, they would be protesting the lowering of the price of electricity and gas because the reforms that I have instituted, one of the effects of it is, in fact, the lowering of the cost of electricity and gas. So, much as I've played with Kazakhstan, this one doesn't seem to be directly me because in my reform, the price of electricity and gas is going down. The only thing that we've truly had a shortage in is coal, and that is because, despite what I said, people are still going to go for the coal banning early on rather than the late reform. And this is causing coal prices to skyrocket because coal production is going down. And this is one of the things that I have noticed. I pretty blatantly told people that our only realistic chance of stopping this global warming is to ban coal immediately. And if we do, I did say it then, we're going to see 650 million people dying from poverty and starvation over the course of 5 years, starting around 10, 15 years after the banning of coal, because the struggle to keep the economy going after coal is banned will slowly start to tank the economy and various other things. While if we keep using carbohydrates and reduce the dirtier ones and increase the cleaner ones and increase the forestation rate and do all this stuff that we're talking about, then we might see a slow steadying out. But it will take 100 years to get to CO2 negative. So these guys are using the option of coal ban, which to me seems like they're going with the only slim chance that current technology gives. And my opinion is that we should wait for technology to improve while going towards greener options and waiting for the magic bullet. That's basically our only option at this point. And if this doesn't much talk of coal, but rather the increasing cost of electricity. And I will say again that in my model, the cost of electricity actually goes down because we tend to overproduce in my model, and that is causing a lower pricage. And we will at the same time also release or lighten the taxation on petroleum while increasing the taxation on carbon dioxide production, which mostly affects large corporations and not small corporations and individuals. And this seems to be more connected with the spirit of bad energy that was floating around for the past few days, because there has been a lot of bad mojo floating around. So they might have caught the same thing that I caught, because you can see from my yesterday's update that I was not feeling well. So this might be the thing. But let me read this. Here it is. Disturbance started in Mangstiao region in western Kazakhstan after liquid gas local prices rose. Thousands of protesters were demanding the government resign. After that, the president, this can mean met, but with the context of the words, it probably means more like the government acceded to some of the demands instead of the president flying to the region and meeting in person. and the price of liquid gas was decided to be lowered as per the protesters' demand. The president also shone light on the possibility that the most poorest could be supported with different actions, and this did not stop the protest. And Kazakhstan is requesting military aid from its alliance, which is basically the former Soviet Union. This smells like normal civilian protest, but with some level of bent up anger. I wouldn't say these guys smell like normal day to day civilians, but they don't smell like outsiders either. They smell like the Amnesty International says that this protest is probably because of the trampling of the basic rights of the people. But to me, this seems more like a protest against loosening the government control, in my opinion. This seems like almost like a anti-liberalization protest, like back when we were in the Soviet Union, we used to get everything for free type protest. It almost feels like, and the fact that the government acceded to the demands and did some other conciliatory steps, but it didn't calm the protests, seems to me like this is not connected to the protests. Like there is something else involved here. It feels like to me, and I would be hesitant to get involved in this. It just seems like this might be, I hate to say CoinPro or counterintelligence program, but this does seem like it may not be a protest for freedom, but a protest against westernization, because that's what we've been doing there. And if they follow the legal reform path, then this might be the thing. But if they were following it, then it is weird that they are protesting against the cost of liquid gas. But if they're following the trend, then the president certainly can lower the price of liquid gas. I am considering it a little weird, but as per historic standard, that the protest didn't calm after the president acceded. And there are reports of actual air combat, which seems a little weird considering this is supposed to be a protest movement. I could check threat map, but I don't think I should. I don't think I want to stick my head out there. But I am getting a fairly strong sense of needing to do so. Like it might be time to get involved in this. Good day, Mr. Tallyransel. You are probably a bot based on what you said, but do stick around and talk. Actually, gonna do this. This is a gloriously bad idea. Can we have some report on what's happening in Kazakhstan? What are they protesting about and what they want the Kazakhstan government to do? Can we have some kind of idea? I've heard. the Finnish media reported in that I've heard that there has been an actual air combat against somebody in Kazakhstan. That's the latest that I heard. So, can we have some news? Does anybody know what the hell is going on? What they're protesting about? What's the hubbub about? I heard they were protesting the high price of liquid gas, which the president then reduced the price of. And I'm hearing that the reduction of the price didn't calm the protesters. I'm also hearing that there are differing reports on whether or not the protesters are armed. And I am actually hearing reports of aerial combat. They didn't specify whether it was an Air Force bombing a protester group or an Air Force attacking some other form of the military, which is in control of part of the Air Force. Whether or not it is an outside thing, a covert military thing, I have no idea. I have heard rumors of many things, but it is weird that the protest didn't calm after the price of the good that they were protesting about was taken lower. And in my experience, these protests tend to be a little unmanaged. They tend to grow in that if somebody finds a cause to complain about, they tend to expand. And I'm looking at this and thinking that in my model, the cost of electricity and gas goes down about 30% after a couple of years from its starting point. So I doubt that it's connected, but I wouldn't rule it out because it is one of those places where I have recently been. So I am looking at it with a very curious eye. Are they protesting that the government liberalized? Are they protesting that the government took the economic working things but didn't liberalize? Are they protesting against the East? Are they protesting against the West? Are they protesting that they're a strong friend of Russia? Are they protesting against Russia? Are they, what is the very cause of the protests? Because the Amnesty International said that it is a protest against the people not having basic rights, but I do not completely trust Amnesty International. They have a policy of having their stances be not at all conductive with what is actually in the field. And I'm also very curious that since the entire government resigned, I think, except for the prime minister or whatever, that none of the news out of Kazakhstan mentions the government ministers supporting the protesters. So it can't be the standard Soviet bloc collapse scenario, because if it were, we'd have the fringe government members protesting against the government and joining the protesters, but this hasn't happened. In throughout history, almost always when it is a genuine protest for more individual rights, the party members who also support more individual rights will almost always actually join the protesters when a protest starts. So I'm a little concerned this joining the protesters has been a part of essentially every single large scale civilian movement that we've ever seen, like in the US, in the government riots in the a year ago. You could see some members of some political movements very noticeably in the front, but this seems to be non-organized. There doesn't seem to be the opposition government. That doesn't seem to exist. So I'm a little concerned, but they also haven't released any kind of material, far as I know of, about what they're aiming for, because the high natural gas costs were immediately corrected by the government, far as the reporting that I saw said. So it cannot be the high natural gas price. I mean, it can be, but I would consider it unusual. So I'm looking at this and wondering what is going on. It seems like it may be the bad mojo of the past couple of days causing people to lose their cool. It might be, because as far as, let's say, mojo goes, then the past couple of weeks have been pretty hard, because for the past 3 months we were told by the media everywhere that as soon as January kicks around, the Russians are going to invade everybody. So the tension level in the world is pretty high. So it might just be the tension level rising and somebody snapping. That might be possible. But in such a case, there would usually be some form of unified demand, perhaps might be the word. But let us study this. There are some videos that YouTube doesn't allow me to show. You will see. German news on Kazakhstan. I was expecting Kazakhstani news.
Police in Kazakhstan's largest city,
Russia.
Almaty, tell state media that
Or
dozens of
China.
protesters have been killed in what they call an attempt to storm administrative buildings and police stations. Explosions and apparent guns were also heard in the city's main square, where reporters say hundreds had gathered to protest against the government. Kazakhstan's president has asked for help, and Russia will lead an alliance of former Soviet states in dispatching what they call peacekeeping forces to help quell the unrest. The protests were triggered by surging fuel prices.
So they say.
Night falls, and the unrest in Almaty intensifies further. What began as a protest against fuel prices has quickly spiraled out of control. Local media reports that several security personnel have died, while flights in and out of Almaty have been cancelled. The president has confirmed that protesters stormed the airport earlier on Wednesday. The protests originally began over the weekend in the remote oil hub of Zhanaozen, but after the government announced an end to price caps on fuel, the unrest quickly spread to other cities. Now, a nationwide state of emergency is in place. In Almaty, police have been deployed to curb the unrest.
You can notice how, despite the whole metric shit ton of sometimes bad mood we get from the East, the Finnish reporting is still remarkably balanced, because these guys are saying nothing of the president reducing the cost of the thing. Even after the protests, they're saying president raised after the protest. Finnish media said president lowered after the protest, and protest didn't end. So you can see the difference.
But tear gas and stun grenades have done little to dissuade the crowds. Neither have hundreds of arrests, nor the imposition of a curfew and movement restrictions in several regions. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev said he would reinstate price controls. But by now, protesters are calling for political change beyond the price of fuel. In a surprise move, President Tokayev also sacked the government and took control of the State Security Committee, ousting former president and longtime ruler Nursultan Nazarbayev. Now, with Tokayev solely at the helm, he has called in the military, and he says no matter what, he will stay in the capital. As the head of state and, from today, the president of the Security Council, I intend to act as tough as possible. Kazakhstan's authoritarian government usually tolerates little real opposition, but this time, the protesters' anger seems to have caught the authorities off guard.
Well, joining me now is journalist Bruce Pania, a Central Asia specialist. He's following the story for us from Prague. Bruce, the internet has been shut down in Kazakhstan now. What is the latest that you're hearing from your sources on the ground there?
Well, there seemed to be some partial restoration of the internet last night, late. I don't know if they've tried to black it out again. You know, you mentioned that Russia agreed that they were going to send some troops over there to help out, and there is what they're calling in Kazakhstan a counter-terrorism operation underway in Almaty at the moment. So I'm sure that the internet is down in Almaty, and there's probably a blackout in some of the other nearby regions too, some of the big cities as well. So it's been hard to get information for days out there, and until they get to the point where they think they've restored order in Almaty, I would imagine it would be very difficult to connect.
Well, the size of the protest, it does come as a surprise, really. How could a small uprising against fuel prices get this serious? What's the background to all this?
Well, there's been simmering tensions out there for quite some time. I mean, there's a huge disparity in wealth in that country. People connected to the former president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, and his family members have done very well. I mean, some of them are billionaires. They own, luxurious properties in Europe, for instance, in the Middle East. The average person is getting by on, a couple $100 a month, and sometimes, in some cases, even less than that. There's been problems with social benefits over the years, working conditions. So there's really a whole bowl full of problems that have come up in the last few years, and this fuel price hike just was the catalyst, to set off the whole, for everyone to vent their frustrations for many, many years. And I should mention also, of course, that Tokayev came in after Nazarbayev resigned in March 2019. There were expectations on the part of many people that this was going to be a new era in Kazakhstan, but it never materialized. The government continued to operate exactly as it did. There were no opposition parties registered. No real reforms were implemented in the country. So people just, like I said, got frustrated that after nearly 3 years, really nothing had changed except who was the president of the country.
Well, the so-called Collective Security Treaty Organization will send peacekeepers now to Kazakhstan at the country's request. Does that mean that Russian troops will crack down on the protesters?
Well, it's interesting. Crackdown might not be exactly the right word. Kazakh forces seem to be already working. And, I want to make clear, too, that as far as I've been able to tell, this is only happening in Almaty. Kazakhstan's a very big country. The appearance of Russian forces on the streets of Almaty will bring back horrible memories from the Soviet era, without a doubt, but it might be enough to help restore calm in that area. But there's a lot of problems they're going to face for this in the future. People in Kazakhstan will not be happy that Tokayev had to resort to calling in the CSTO to help him out. And he's framed this all of a sudden last night as being the work of a band of terrorists who were trained outside the country, and there was absolutely no evidence that that's the case. This appears to be purely a popular uprising. And it's sort of ridiculous if you look at the pictures of some of these protesters. They're oil workers, women, people like that. How these got to be a band of terrorists who were trained outside the country, I have no idea, but he used that as the pretext to call in the CSTO. He's going to pay a price for that for, days, months, years to come, probably.
Journalist Bruce Pania there, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Violence in Kazakhstan. Protesters there have stormed and set fire to government buildings in the country's largest city. The violence there follows days of mass demonstrations over surging fuel prices. The country's president today spoke of deaths and injuries in the protest. He said that he would act forcefully to end the unrest.
authoritarian ex-Soviet republic. For 4 days, these people have been taking to the streets. Protests started in the remote oil hub of Zhanaozen, but they quickly spread to other cities after the government announced an end to price caps on fuel. Now the unrest appears to be spiraling and hitting the country's largest city, Almaty, in particular. Protesters are calling for wider political changes. Police have deployed in numbers in a bid to curb the unrest. But tear gas and stun grenades have done little to dissuade protesters. Neither have hundreds of arrests, nor the imposition of a curfew and movement restrictions on several regions. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has sacked the government and moved to reinstate price controls in response. But with protests escalating, the president has vowed to hold firm. As the head of state, and from today, the president of the Security Council, to act as tough as possible. No matter what, I will stay in the capital. Kazakhstan's authoritarian government usually tolerates little real opposition. But this time, the protesters' anger seems to have caught the authorities off guard.
And for more now, I'm joined by Ayzarim Talikhanova. She's a freelance journalist. She's currently in Prague. She just arrived there this morning from Kazakhstan. Ayzarim, it's good to have you with us. What are you hearing? What is the latest right now on the situation?
The latest right now I know is that internet connection has been restored in some cities of Kazakhstan. It's been off for around 7 hours. And the people whom I contacted, the sources on the ground, say that it's quite an anarchy on the street. There is no presence of police or any security forces. And we know that protesters have captured the Almaty airport, have burned down the prosecution office, the city hall of Almaty is still burning, and several state TV offices are also burning. So it's still ongoing, and it's going to develop further.
So, and we've got reports that Tokayev has sacked the government and taken over the country's Security Council. So do we know who is in charge of the country right now?
The head of Security Council used to be Nursultan Nazarbayev, the former president until 2019. And now Tokayev has stated in his address to the nation that he will now take over this title, which probably means that Nazarbayev may not be in the country or is not able to control the situation. So right now, what we know is that people on the ground say that there is no control over the situation, but Tokayev is appealing to different governments, particularly CSTO, to help Kazakhstan curb this current violent protest.
And Ayzarim, you mentioned former President Nazarbayev. Do we know anything about his whereabouts tonight?
No, we don't know anything about his location or of his family. And we also haven't heard from him in the last few days when the protests were escalating. And it's usually the case when there are protests, Nazarbayev very rarely publicly speaks out about them. And right now, we just have heard of Tokayev and probably some other people who are working behind the scenes. But it seems to me that the situation is still very shaky, and Kazakhstan's government does not have enough resources to control the situation on the streets in different parts of the country.
Well, we understand that this started over protests over increasing fuel prices, but how do you explain that in Kazakhstan, a country that sits on some of the world's largest oil reserves?
Haaveiletko uudesta keittiöstä? Kannattaa lisätä poveria haaveiluun.
Yeah, That's actually an interesting note because the protests have started in the western part of Kazakhstan, which is rich in oil and gas and other natural resources. But this part of Kazakhstan has also seen a lot of inequality. The people there who own oil and gas companies, they don't see the benefits from the natural resources that Kazakhstan is extracting from this part of the country. And I think that for people, it's also a surprise that a gas-rich Kazakhstan would increase prices, given that people's economic situation was already being very dire and very heavy, and many people are still saving money even to buy meat and other products. So I think that the official reason that they were protesting because of the increase in oil or gas prices is just the tip of the iceberg, because there have been many problems accumulating in the last 3 decades that Kazakhstan has to deal with now.
Journalist Ayşerim Toliukhanova joining us tonight with the latest on that situation in Kazakhstan. Ayşerim, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
While tensions in Kazakhstan continue to grow, the world is trying to understand what is behind this unrest. The Central Asian country has escaped the global spotlight for decades. Here's a closer look now at the former Soviet republic's recent history and what the protests tonight could mean for its authoritarian rule.
The gaudy and at times bizarre modernism of Kazakhstan's capital, Nur-Sultan. This newly-rich city recently shed its previous name, Astana, in honor of the man who has ruled the country for 3 decades. Nur-Sultan Nazarbayev led Kazakhstan into independence in 1991 during the collapse of the Soviet Union. He ruled as an autocrat, rigging elections and quashing any opposition. He also tapped Kazakhstan's abundant oil and gas reserves to embark on a course of modernization and economic reform. Nazarbayev stepped down as president in 2019 and installed loyalist Kassym-Jomart Tokayev as his successor. But he retains his power and his official title, leader of the nation. For all the glitzy facades and economic growth, progress remains out of reach for many. According to the World Bank, half the population lives in remote areas with poor infrastructure and widespread poverty. It is in areas like these where the protests over surging fuel prices began. The unrest could finally pry open Nazarbayev's iron grip on the country. President Tokayev has taken over as head of the National Security Council, a position that had concentrated power in the hands of his predecessor.
Kazakhstan has fallen as protesters marched to Almaty, set the president's home ablaze, and are now involving the police, the military, and possibly Russia's military, as Kazakhstan's government has resigned. Now, to me, that's very interesting how the mainstream media is going to cover this story, because if you look at the highlighted article on Twitter, they talk about how Kazakhstan's government's resigning and there's unprecedented unrest, but the idea they attribute it to an energy price hike where, yes, they have skyrocketing fuel costs over there, but they're really ignoring the other key contributing figures or factors to why there's protests right now, and also the offshoot that it's causing cryptocurrency to just absolutely tank. You're seeing Bitcoin and Ethereum lose significant value, and it's the idea because Kazakhstan, to try to quell the protests, have cut all internet usage over there, and they were one of the top Bitcoin mining countries where they're out there mining Bitcoin by verifying transactions, because you see over there how Kazakhstan lost pretty much all their internet connectivity, and they were responsible for 12% of the Bitcoin hash, which in very oversimplification terms is they're just Bitcoin's processing power to try to verify transactions. It's causing the values to tank a bit, and just more people get scared, so everybody's offloading their currency, which is pretty scary. Now, if you want to know what happened on the ground floor over there, I did a video yesterday about the protests on the ground floor, and I think I did a pretty good job. But the other portion of this is I have a lot of followers on this channel right now, which gave a lot of good input, where they say, Dimitri talked about how, yeah, it's... because of the sudden raise of gas prices, but it's also because of deteriorating economies, social inequality, and also corruption. You had Yurden talking about, yes, it's because of the fuel prices, but it's been building up day by day from other things. And also Ernest would talk about how he's from Kazakhstan himself. He's currently in the U.S. He says the rise in fuel prices were the catalyst, but the main reason was the long-term problems: large-scale corruption, declining economy, inequality, dictatorship. And this is the first time since their independence from the USSR that they were able to protest on a nationwide scale before all the attempts were swiftly shut down forcibly, and people were taken care of and interrogated. It's getting out of control quickly, and there's a lot of looting and robbing happening because the government is distracted. I just hope Russia or China does not intervene, and it may have horrible consequences for the country in general. So I want to give a great appreciation to all the people that give input in these stories on my channel, because, again, I'm not a specialist in any of this stuff. I'm just a regular guy that just started noticing politics and just the decoy narrative and how bad the mainstream media is. But just people like Dmitry, Yurden, and Ernest, where this is how we have a open dialogue about things, because this channel isn't an echo chamber. So I really appreciate those people saying those things. And another thing I wanted to highlight is you have Kaztag, one of the outlets where I believe some of the protest is over Kaztag because the government wanted them to take down a story, and Kaztag said no. So it was a thing of censorship, and that's why people are upset. But also the other factor is the protesters are they're marching in the snow, and you got to compare this to like the U.S. where, sad to say, yeah, we have a lot of protests, but not in bad weather. Like if it's raining or snowing, Americans just don't show up. And I just think that, you have other countries like New Zealand had everybody doing haka to protest something. You're having over here in Kazakhstan, they're marching through snow and just bad weather. And yet Americans, do we have the heart for that if we need to protest in the same way? I don't know. And also the idea that yesterday you had the protest where it was just a lot of pushing and shoving. It's just nothing big was happening. But then you saw a video like this where I can't play it here. I'll cross-post it on my Twitter so everybody can be credited for their findings. But the idea that this is a car backing up, opening up the trunk, and giving out arms to the protesters in large amounts. And it's the thing of, those aren't cheap. Who's funding this right now? Who is giving these people, the protesters, something to go against their government? I'm very, very curious, because I saw this post from Battle Beagle, and it seems a bit like question marks, but I can verify steps 1 through 3 where they say the CSTO is Russia's version of NATO for the post-Soviet space. Kazakhstan is a member of CSTO, Russia's largest security partner, sharing the largest border with Russia and Asia. The 10th of January will be the U.S.-Russian summit on Putin's ultimatum against NATO. The 5th of January, suddenly, out of random reasons, a 3-day revolution in Kazakhstan leads to the resignation of the government, the surrender of the army, and the seizing of strategic locations such as airports by civilians. And they say, yeah, right, if you can't figure this out, what this is about, you have my condolences. Where 1 through 3 didn't know what CSTO, looked it up. The CSTO is a collective security treaty organization along with Belarus, Armenia, and Tajikistan, and I can't pronounce that word, I'm sorry, but they're all in that same group, and it seems to be something that's rivaled with NATO, where CSTO and NATO are the Russian and American equivalents of each other. So 1 through 3 all appear to be true, and the idea they say, well, a 3-day revolution, and they talk about how the mainstream media covers it as a energy spike, the spike in energy prices, and the idea that suddenly they can take over the airport and they can seize strategic locations, and it's just civilians mad about gas prices. I'm beginning to think there's something more to this right now, because if you look at over here where you have Nambahor over on Twitter talking about how they're protesting out there, and it's some pretty shocking imagery where if you look at this looks a bit like what happened in the U.S., except you don't have vans dropping off several arms of the citizens. You're having a very large military force being deployed, where this is the same shape that I saw earlier in this video. You see to the right where they have these trucks in the front, and then they were lobbing things over it with these guys with metal shields behind them. Not the last one. You have the citizens all marching what looked to be peacefully, but then you saw them dropping off arms, and then you see one of the guys actually has one of their shields, and they just seem to be peacefully assembling. You're seeing the protesters on just some random truck versus I believe they says police, but I know that the military was deployed too. They call it a state of emergency because everything's getting destroyed. You're seeing other aerial shots of this, and it's very, very it's a large-scale protest that's happening right now. You're seeing this is from Al Jazeera English, where they have the video of them marching. And you can hear the things going off in the background, and then you see them marching on what I believe is the president's home from the DW. You see this glow there? They're marching against the area. So again, looking at the mainstream media's coverage where they talk about, CNN says there's emergency declared in Kazakhstan as fuel protests rage and government resigns. And again, I was looking for those other elements that people were talking about, but I couldn't find that. But what I could see is Tokayev, who was the president, says in a national television address on Wednesday, he will take control of the country's Security Council, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but would that be the equivalent of Donald Trump taking over the military, or President Biden saying, okay, now I'm in charge of the nation's Security Council? I wonder what that means, but that seems a bit bizarre. If you look at Reuters, they talk about how 8 police and National Guard troops had perished and 317 were injured during the unrest in Kazakhstan. And if you look down here, this article is just laughably short, but if you look at the AP News or Associated Press's article talking about how they escalated in Kazakhstan, president's home set ablaze. If you read down here, it says Tokayev said on state television shortly before midnight that he has called on other countries in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO, an alliance of ex-Soviet states, including Russia, for assistance in restoring order. But it was not clear what measures he had asked for. So then you saw Press Secretary Jen Psaki for Joe Biden had said, I'm dismissing the Russian claims that the U.S. is behind Kazakhstan unrest, which it makes no sense for us to be behind that over there. But then if you see over here from, this is armradio.am, Public Radio Armenia, how the Armenian Prime Minister starts urgent consultations with the CSTO, and it's Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan. And then you have the Newsweek article saying that the Russian military alliance will send troops to Kazakhstan. And if you read down here, it says Pashinyan, the Armenian Prime Minister, released a follow-up statement in which he cited the dangers threatening Kazakhstan's national security and sovereignty, which have arisen as a result of external intervention, where it's external intervention. What's happening that's not inside the country? I don't know. And they announced that a decision has been made to send CSTO collective peacekeeping forces to the Republic of Kazakhstan for a limited period of time for the country in order to stabilize and normalize the situation. So are we possibly going to see Russian military forces inside Kazakhstan to quell the protests? Because you already knew that Russia was amassing troops near the Ukrainian border. This is from CBS News, but this has been a thing that everybody's reporting. And if you look at the map right now, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, it could appear that Russia is possibly trying to expand their influence across the country, especially after that other article talking about how January 10th, the U.S. and Russia is going to sit down for security talks because of the Ukrainian tensions. And then I believe Putin said something about the U.S. would not want to put sanctions against Russia over this. So that is getting everything tense, and it's barely 5 days into 2022. It's crazy, but also the idea that they talk about how the Bitcoin mining hash rates are falling, where you put your money over in cryptocurrency because you want to save it from your government possibly flooding the market with extra dollar bills by passing stimulus package after stimulus package after $billions after billions of dollars, just flooding the market, devaluing your money. But now if you look at the idea how Kazakhstan's government's cracking down on protests, so they cut off the internet, and also the idea that it's impacted the Bitcoin mining pools because mining companies flocked to Kazakhstan after the crackdown in China seeking cheap energy, which has disappeared. And now it's a thing of, now if you have this decentralized currency, yeah, you're protected from your own personal government, but now you're not protected from the worldwide stage. And it's like, what a bizarre thing to happen right now. And I'm not going to sit here and cry about my cryptocurrency portfolio while residents of Kazakhstan have their life turned upside down because of potential civil war. But it is very interesting that every single conflict is happening in every single country at the same time. And it's almost like this G word we keep on hearing popping up in the world, because look at Coinbase right now talking about every single cryptocurrency with a couple different exceptions of these cryptos that seem to be just very, I don't want to say unreliable, but just not very stable. But if you look at Bitcoin, Ethereum 2, Binance Coin, or Cardano, even those smaller coins like Dogecoin, a Joe coin, or Shiba Inu coin was a Joe coin, all these coins are collapsing. And is it because of one country is having civil unrest? That's very, very concerning to say the least. So one thing over here from my favorite Twitter follower at the time, ZeroSum24, where he's showing that they're even looting a 2022, which is this looks like this encapsulates what's happening in 2021 and 2022 right now, where we're even robbing the 2022 store, where this is what's more to come. I really hope things turn around, but it doesn't really look like it because everything is escalating on a worldwide scale. So if you appreciate my coverage, make sure you subscribe down below, turn on notifications, possibly share.
might be a case of bad timing, but it is indeed interesting that this happens like 3 days before the meeting, and found it curious that somebody was driving guns to the protesters. I find that very curious. Let's see the Russian news. We've now seen the online and
Managed to
the
actually
German
establish
news
a
and the
signal
Finnish
with our
news.
correspondent Igor Zhdanov. It's glad to see you up and about here. We understand there's been a bit of a problem with the Wi-Fi signals or the internet signal in that region. You're now in the Kazakh capital, Nur-Sultan. What is the latest? Bring us up to speed, please.
Well, Rory, you're absolutely right. There have been problems here with pretty much everything. When it comes to connection, in fact, it has been reduced to text messaging, and for me personally, only incoming calls. So there's no 3G, no L. There's no internet, basically. Even cable connections, they don't work. And according to reports that we're seeing, countrywide effort by the government to completely all airwaves and reduce them to the most basic communication. Again, I can't call people, I can only receive incoming calls here. Also, you might have noticed that behind me it's bright, it's the light of day. Well, it is a fake background, and unfortunately we have to use this studio which only has one background, which is a day one, and we can't go outside because simply, again, there's no connection there, and so we have to use this one because there's only a handful of options how to go live and talk to you and to report from the ground again live, and we are using one of these very few options all across Kazakhstan. And pretty much every major city here in the country has faced, absolute mayhem and chaos lately. In the former capital of Kazakhstan, in the city of Almaty, situation got completely out of control. Basically, their protesters managed to completely drive out any sort of law enforcement from the city, from the premises. So there's no National Guard, there's no police, no anything. We've seen reports that they may have disarmed some of the soldiers, some of the police officers as well, so they may have access to actual guns with live ammunition, which is a very scary development given that it's a city of millions with absolutely lawlessness, with an absolute state of lawlessness and not a single policeman on the ground. According to the latest reports that we have received here, they have already, marauders, they have begun looting and ransacking ATMs. They have captured the airport in that city. So basically, we were supposed to get there, but our flight has been formally delayed. But in all fairness, all flights to that town, they have been cancelled, and cities shutting down one by one due to all the mayhem and chaos, because Almaty is far from the only city that has faced such brutality on the side of, both sides. Other towns as well, and in some other smaller cities, there, the police, they actually switched sides and joined the protesters. Again, going back to the former capital there as well, for example, protesters, they stormed the local mayor's office, and they set ablaze every single floor of it, and they also stormed the former presidential residence, and they set it ablaze as well. Now, just in the past coming minutes, we've heard from the incumbent president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. He addressed the nation, and he has essentially promised a more firm response from here on out. He has promised that he will use more force to quell the unrest here, to quench it, so to speak, because so far, basically, protesters, it all started as a protest against a hike in liquid gas prices, but it very quickly escalated into something very basic, into something more bold and blatant. The protesters have been demanding a complete reshuffle of power. They've been demanding the president steps down. They've been calling for an end of oligarchy and corruption. So again, very bold demands. And until recently, the government has been very understanding, I could say, and they have been taking very rather sizable steps towards giving an olive branch to the protesters. Like just yesterday, the president dismantled the government and began forming a new interim one. And there have been a bunch of other measures like bringing the prices of liquid gas and other petrol down. But all of that has failed to resolve the situation here. And from what we've seen today, things have only turned worse. And here, I mean, in the capital, it's a state of emergency as well. I mean, there is a curfew. Basically, you can't show your face outside a building past 11 p.m. and until 7 a.m. We will have to head back to our hotel shortly because it is 9 p.m. in the evening right now. So it looks like here in the capital, things have been rather quiet, I should say, even though dozens of people still showed up and they will round. It looks, all this feels like a lull, because one thing to understand about the city here, it's a white collar and blue collar haven. Basically all governmental workers, most of them, they live and work here. Also, it's very, very cold. So right now I've talked to a bunch of locals, and they have told me that, they are waiting for the weekend because that's when it will get warmer and they will have more free time on their hands. So we'll have to wait and see how things develop. But so far, very troubling developments here as cities have been falling one by one into lawlessness to protesters. And the government has, all efforts have turned out to be futile so far. So it's unclear if even here in the capital, the authorities and the law enforcement will be able to stop this pendulum of chaos from swinging completely out of control.
All right, so Igor, you're reporting right now from the Kazakh capital, Nur Sultan. As you said, it's comparatively calm there when you do compare it with some of the other cities. You were referring to that of the former capital, Almaty, where we've seen some pretty serious scenes of demonstrations, protesters, violence, and even setting the main administrative building on fire. Igor, while I've still got you here, I wanted to ask you, because the Kazakhstan president, Tokayev, he's placing the blame for the ongoing unrest on unnamed, financially motivated plotters. He claimed that the, quote, hooligans storming the administrative buildings were, quote, highly organized, and the violence has already left multiple law enforcement officers injured or even reportedly dead. That's according to the Kazakh president, Tokayev. What would you say in response to that? Because we've seen footage of thousands of people expressing their grievances on the streets of major cities.
Well, there have been thousands and even I'd say tens of thousands all across the country showing up. I mean, obviously, this is I'd say it's a very drastic change in rhetoric that we've heard from President Tokayev, because just days ago, his messaging was along the lines that I hear the nation, I hear your concerns, and we're paying very, very close attention to it, and basically will help you, that the government is here for you. I mean, this is, of course, not a direct quote, but this was the kind of the spirit behind it. Now there has been a noticeable change in this rhetoric, because Tokayev has been saying, look, it's just a bunch of financially motivated, radicals, and we will not shy away from using force to stop what's going on there. And I mean, it has been in Almaty, it has been quite bloody, it has been quite nasty in other towns as well. But again, so far, the government has failed to show the capacity to contain such a massive uprising, because they do have the strength in numbers. So the only hope here is that it doesn't any more lives that it already has, and so that basically both sides, since both sides they might have a point. I mean, every side here, they absolutely believe that they have a point, so that they will be able to resolve this through dialogue, because Kazakhstan is a very difficult, both ethnically and secularly and religiously. It's a very difficult nation. And I mean, if I were to go into it, we'd need a good hour to just, get into the very basic stuff here. But yeah, just take my word for it. Kazakhstan, it is it's a complex nation. It's a complex, melting pot of cultures as well. Again, it's a very big country too. So if it plunges into lawlessness, consequences can be absolutely devastating both for the country and for the region.
All right.
I'm hearing when I'm listening to the protesters some talk about why we haven't gone from studying this VAT reform to implementing this VAT reform despite the problems. And you can protest all you want. We're not going to rush this one. We're not going to rush this one. I doubt that the protesters have anything to do with that because they seem motivated by something else. But on the off chance that they're the guys who are asking why we haven't implemented these things despite Corona going to Omicron, which is actually less harmful than the previous strains, which goes to prove that the government model we're doing is actually like more tenable than the normal model. So the protesters are asking why we are not implementing it, why we are like building a hydrogen plant or something like that, but not implementing the basic government reforms. And all I can say to that is the same I've said before: we're not ready. If we do it now, the problems that will arise will be akin to what happened to the Soviet Union when they instituted their reforms in the 1985 or so. And currently, we really don't have the option of implementing the reforms now. We could, but it would not be beneficial, to put it mildly, to rush a change like this. And as long as we're still doing the VAT test, which we are, then the countries that have had the VAT test before really can't rush in front of us. They can, but it would be unwise. So if these protesters are the guys who are asking us why we're not able to do the liberalization reform for real, it is honestly because we haven't seen the full reactions yet. We don't know what would happen. We could do it, but if we are to use a form of government reform where we don't know the rough outcome, we could just pick a reform at roughly random and the result would be the same. That's what I'm seeing. If these guys, as unlikely as it is, are the reformists for the VAT thing, and that's as far as I can say. But judging from listening to these people, watching the protests and such, I'm hesitant to call it a, let's say, VAT issue. This smells more like the start of the year problem that was predicted 3 months ago, that we will see a increase in instability at the start of the year, which was predicted like in September or even before that. And it is, like one of those commentators said, very interesting that this happens about 5 days before the Putin Biden summit. It's interesting. It's interesting because it is possible these are the Kazakhstani anti-East protesters, and they're trying to put pressure on Russia to have a preferable outcome during the negotiations. But that's a pretty big boulder to put your country into, to be frank. To me, this just seems like the slow reform causing jitters. I know I hate to say it, but this feels like the slow reform causing jitters. They are looking at why we aren't doing the full reform immediately. And I'm just like, you do realize that the reform isn't ready. I mean, you could do it, but with the current knowledge that we have of the reform, I can guarantee you that for a couple of years, your people will be poorer. And that doesn't seem a good option if you don't have every idea ready of what's going to happen after that couple of years. All I can say in the hopes of calming this situation down is that we're not ready for the reform that we're thinking of. If you're thinking of the same reform, all I can tell you is that give it time. But on the off chance or the high probability that this isn't in any way connected to me, all I can say is, damn it, bad timing. So, yeah. Yeah, there we go. I hope you all will survive and prosper in this dangerous time, and I hope this isn't. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. Thank you for watching.